House Bill 833 is a bill to amend the Code of Virginia relating to group violence intervention programs. The bill is reported for the Committee on Public Safety with the substitute on January 28th and subsequently reported by the Committee on Appropriations.
The delegate from Rockingham, Delegate Wilt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee substitute.
Shall the committee substitute be agreed to? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The substitute is agreed to. The delegate from Rockingham.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. House Bill 833 establishes the Operation Ceasefire Grant Fund, to support group violence intervention in our communities throughout the state, and that is the main goal, the purpose of the bill. Project Ceasefire is a tried and true method across our nation in many cities at doing just this, Mr. Speaker. It's kind of a three-tiered approach through enforcement, deterrence, and building relationships in our communities, with the goal of offering those caught up in violent criminal acts and activities to be able to exit and get a better path forward in life. So I move the bill be engrossed and passed to its third read. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, I was remiss. Also, what the substitute does, it moves the whole fund over into the purview of the Attorney General's office. And I move the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
The delegate from Fairfax, Delegate Simon.
Mr. Speaker, speaking to the bill.
The delegate has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this is another one of these situations. And for those of you that are new to the body, I know we have a lot of new members. I think it's important that you be careful about which summary you read, because until we adopt the substitute, the summary that you see is the summary of the introduced bill. And so this, as you just heard the patron say, the substitute's different in a number of important ways from the introduced bill. Most importantly is that this takes this whole project away from DCJS, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, which is a multidisciplinary body that can work and coordinate with all kinds of agencies, including police, local law enforcement, has relationships with DCJS to handle the mental health side of it, can coordinate with the Department of Veterans Services, because we all know that veterans and communities in particular are affected by gun violence and pulls it all out and moves it over to the Attorney General's office, right? The same Attorney General's office, by the way, who I pointed out, has watered down our efforts on human trafficking, but that's sort of beside the point. This is another sort of watered down effort. And I don't want people to think, well, this is just sort of the Republican version. I know that there's another Democratic version of this and they're about the same. It's just sort of a little bit of a difference in approach. Because this is a substantially inferior product to what we have offered on our side of the aisle. A bill that's been referred but not docketed at the Department of Public Safety. And at this point, given where the calendar is and given that it's subject to having probably go to appropriations, it's a bill that probably won't be docketed and heard. And that's disappointing, Mr. Speaker, because we have an opportunity, or had an opportunity, to really seriously address violence prevention and firearms prevention in a really robust and serious way that this bill doesn't accomplish. And I know it's Friday, but I think it's important that we understand before we vote on this bill what it is that we're voting on. And it's not exactly what's been sold to the public. So we got to look first at the definition of what gun violence intervention is. It's a three-part definition, and it's programs that are designed to reduce violence and homicide. I think we all think that's good. Minimize harm to communities, and that sounds good too, but you got to get to the modifier. Minimize harm to communities through deterrence and enforcement. All right? So apparently the problem is we don't have long enough sentences. We don't have enough police doing more enforcement. That's not, Mr. Speaker, what many of us think of as prevention. Right? Prevention is getting in there before the violence happens, getting into the root causes of what's causing these encounters to happen before they get there, Mr. Speaker. And then fostering stronger relationships between members of law enforcement and the community. We need to forge stronger relationships between people at every level. You know, I certainly, don't know that I need to have a better relationship with law enforcement in my community. I've lived in my house for 12 years. I don't think I've ever seen a police car patrolling my street once. Right? So I don't know that that's really the problem that we're trying to address here. What this bill does, it says we can have grants and training, so grants to provide for training for law enforcement officers and prosecutors, providing equipment to law enforcement agents. That's the problem. I didn't realize. That's the problem. The reason we have so much gun violence is because we haven't given enough equipment to the police. Mr. Speaker, members of the House, this is not a good bill. This is not even a good start. I got up here, frankly, prepared to say this bill is a good start and I'm moving in the right direction. And so I'd understand. But this bill, the more you read it, the closer you look at these definitions, the more you realize what's missing. This bill is not even a good start. This is all about giving law enforcement more money. So we're shifting $7 million to the Attorney General's office. By the way, it's a $27 million program that we've actually, so although it looks like more money for this Operation Ceasefire, this is a $20 million reduction from what Governor Northam put in the budget to seriously address issues of violence and firearm violence. And to tell you what we could have done, we could have had DCJS become a primary resource for research on best practices and strategies, right? We want this to be evidence-based, Mr. Speaker. We don't want to just throw money at the problem. We want to spend money to do research, collect data, find out what works in different kinds of communities, what works in communities like mine, what works in communities like Newport News, Richmond City, and Wise County, and Shenandoah, and Rockingham. All those communities may need a different solution, and we have evidence that we can collect and put together in one place to make sure that the strategies we employ work. This bill completely ignores, frankly, and I had a bill for gun violence prevention. Mine was a real do-nothing bill, right? But it was a feel-good bill. It was a bill on license plates. And when I introduced my bill to put a gun violence prevention license plate, I was told the real problem was mental health. And so we should take the money from the sale of my license plates and establish a funded DCJS. Mr. Speaker, we had a bill. We had a bill that would have had the Department of Criminal Justice Services work with DCJS and the Department of Veteran Services and local law enforcement to look at some of the root causes of gun violence. That's not in this bill, Mr. Speaker. That's not in this bill. We leave DCJS, we leave DVS out. We give it all to the Attorney General's office, Mr. Speaker. We could have had a bill that would have had, again, working on hospital violence and the Department of Health and Human Services. We could have done so much more, Mr. Speaker. We could have addressed this problem. We could have required these best practices and model policies to be developed, to be shared, not just with the Attorney General's office, with Commonwealth attorneys, but with local law enforcement, with sheriff's offices, with the people on the ground at social service agencies and community groups that are charged with getting to the root causes of violence. So I understand, kind of like human trafficking, you want to be able to check a box to say, hey, we're working on getting to the root causes of violence. We're trying to get to these things before they happen. But Mr. Speaker, this bill does not do that. This is window dressing. This puts more money into the Attorney General's office, more money for law enforcement, more money for law enforcement equipment. That's not going to get us where we need to be if we want to start to address the very serious problem of firearm violence and violence in our communities and make Virginia a safer place to live, work, and raise a family. I hope that it'll be the pleasure of the body not to engross this bill and pass it to its third reading.